Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm your host, Oscar. You can follow the show on Twitter at MiamiPod. The website, themiamipod.com, is where you can find the iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, RSS feeds, as well as a Patreon and PayPal links if you would like to help support us. Joined as ever by Ian Wharton, who you can follow at NFL Film Study and draftcentric.weebly.com and Bleacher Report for all his football, NFL, and college coverage. And today we're going to go over some of the remaining free agents in positions of need, in particular for the Dolphins. And then we're going to do one of our Patreon episodes that's from Jake Swartzwald. He wanted us to do a topic on defensive end arm attire. So we're going to talk about that and then kind of expand that more onto identifying players when watching film and kind of the process, and at least the process of watching film and what we look at first and the notes we keep on a player's appearance, stance, etc. To help with watching film. But first we'll get into some free agent stuff, and I guess like the most notable name to start this off has been Orlando Franklin being just released by the Chargers. And there's been like some really interesting like PFF kind of graphics showing off like players' declines of late. And what's kind of interesting about those is it, like, to me, it shows no context at all, and probably and also shows like teams sometimes don't have plans. Like we always try and be optimistic about draft picks or free agents signings, thinking a team's going to do the smart thing with a player. And the Chargers with Franklin is kind of the opposite of that. Franklin went from the heaviest outside zone running team in the league to probably the bottom, like second or third least outside zone running team in the league, and he didn't play well. And I think if you're going to, he would be the best guard on the Dolphins, and I think it's probably in the top 5 scheme fits. Also, Gase was the offensive coordinator when he moved from tackle to guard as well. So I think there would be some positives there. I know you are slightly more pessimistic on at least Franklin's play with the Chargers. Was there anything in particular that stood out to you outside of like the scheme not being suited to him?
Well, and that to be honest, that's a pretty hard thing, I think, to look past, and it can make it hard um, to kind of project forward to Miami. He was banged up a little bit with the Chargers as well, and I don't think that helped his cause at all. He's only 29 years old. Week 10, he had a concussion early in the season last year. He had a knee injury, and I'd have to look back, but I think even in his first season with the team, he had yep, he did actually. He had an ankle injury his first season as well. So he was pretty banged up in his time with the Chargers, and I don't think that helped. And so it depends on his weight, and it depends on what type of shape he's in physically. But I would definitely be willing to kick the tires on him. I mean, it's at this point in the offseason, you look at the other list of available players, especially at guard, in a weak free agency and a weak draft class. Like, there's really not going to be anyone that's worth anything. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely be willing to bring him in on a tryout and seeing if he's physically in shape, and worse comes worse, he's not. And adding him as potential competition and depth. You're right, though. Like, even though I didn't think that he was great for that unit, he was also on a part of a really bad unit in general, and so it can be difficult, and it was a tough scheme match for him too. So a lot of factors were against him. So I would absolutely be in favor of bringing him in for a tryout. And worse comes worse, if he's terrible or if he's not in shape, then you didn't give up anything. It's basically like the Culliver situation from last year again, except for he's not coming off a major injury. So yeah, I mean, that to me that would be like a why not situation.
And Franklin's been pretty clean injury-wise, his career. I can't really remember him missing a single game for Denver. I know he missed a couple early on for the Chargers that first season, but I don't think he. I think he played every game last year, pretty much. Even so, he'll play hurt as well. And I think one thing we talk about, like the change in moving from tackle to guard. I think with outside zone, that's also lessened because the footwork is the same for every position on the line. But when you're going to more of a gap scheme or a power scheme or even a more inside zone scheme, the difference in footwork in technique wise from tackle to guard is really different. So I think it's more of and maybe that's why people talk about it being easier to find zone players for offensive line, because you can use players with more versatile skill sets, because there's some translatable ones between all those positions, which I don't see as much between a power tackle and a power guard. I think they're very different players and very different skill sets. So that's kind of one of the advantages of outside zone. And also, like, there's kind of this not necessarily misconception, because I think you do want generally a more athletic player in a zone scheme, but I think it's not necessarily about speed. To me, it's always those first 3 steps. If your offensive linemen are winning those first 3 steps and getting their hands in the right place, I mean, you can just be like stuck in tar. You're still going to be a productive outside zone running team as long as those first 3 steps are right. Because it doesn't matter about where the creases open up; they will open up as long as you're maintaining the correct leverage. So yeah, I think Franklin would be a good pickup. Maybe there would be some things with him coming back to Miami that you would worry about, but I don't know. I don't really look into players' histories, but I think if Gase doesn't pick him up, obviously with his history, unless he's going back to Denver or maybe with the Bears, maybe there's some reason to believe them. But I said that when the Dolphins when they picked Juwan James over Morgan Moses, and like Morgan Moses had kind of weight questions and football IQ questions and off the field questions. And so my assumption was, well, if Laser's not picking him, then they've obviously got good reason not to pick him. And Morgan Moses has ended up being a far better pro than Juwan James so far. So maybe sometimes the fruit you've not been around for that long, you've not like been around much, just looks better when it may not be that. And should just take the bit of fruit with a tiny bit of mold on and just cut it out. I don't know where that analogy was going. We got there somewhere. Anyway, Morgan Moses is not as moldy fruit as Juwan James. That's something. We'll move on to, I guess, interior defensive linemen, because I think that's like this next biggest need after the offensive line interior. I guess I would say it's more like the 0-1 technique more than anything, with them kind of going for the 2-3 techniques in the 3rd day of the draft to kind of committee that position behind Sue. So obviously there's Paul Soliai, I guess Will Sutton as well, maybe Dan Williams, is Mike Purnell. Is there any guys who you think you'd be interested in? I guess even like a Tony McDaniel. I don't know if he's retired or not. Has he?
I don't think so. I haven't seen anything official on that. I like Sutton. I don't know that he's going to be a terrific like one technique.
No.
He's a little bit more of a penetrator, I think. He's played a little bit in different roles, but he's young, 25 years old. A little bit of a surprise that Chicago cut him. But he's an intriguing name. I know I liked him out of college, and he's flashed here and there, even with the Bears. Dan Williams was interesting. I know the team looked at him a couple years ago when he was a free agent. I think he would fit. 29 years old, so he's still pretty in the age range that you would want um, pick up this late. So it's not like it's a guy, probably on like his last career legs. Soliai probably is that guy. He probably is on his last legs. Roy Miller, kind of interesting out of Jacksonville. Sean Derrick Marks, both those guys I think have been. I know Marks for sure did not look the same last year coming off a major injury. Miller was a little bit of a surprise cut. Jared Odrick's still available too, right?
Yeah, but then I guess he's more of the free technique,
Yeah.
5 technique.
Yeah, so there's definitely bodies out there that are rosterable, but I mean I don't know that you're going to get more than like a decent rotational player, especially as like a one technique. I think Dan Williams is going to be the guy that you'd probably gravitate towards. Williams and Soliai. I mean I don't know that there's anyone else really going to be worth it. Just looking through the names, pretty much. I mean Lewis Nix, that's a name from the past. But no, it's a pretty weak. It's a nice group overall, I think, in terms of if you want guys for just here and there snaps. But I don't know that there's anyone besides Williams that I don't think you can count on. And Williams is a guy who's going to play like 20 to 30% of snaps, I think.
Do you think they would entertain another free technique, or do you think with what they did in the draft, they're kind of set in that position? And obviously, in the past couple of years, they haven't had any free technique behind Sue. So do you think they're kind of content with that camp battle behind Sue?
Yeah, barring injury or just like massive disappointment early on, I'm going to guess if they're just going to roll with what they have and pick from one of the two guys that they drafted and probably stick the other guy in the practice squad, which is fine. They actually did invest a little bit in the position, which is definitely encouraging. But yeah, I don't think they would have drafted 2 if they were going
I think
to
they probably
sign a
had
veteran.
priority free agents. Great.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So maybe they, and you know what the thing is a number of these veterans are going to last anyways, because at this point, these vets don't want to sign, like they don't want to go through training camp.
Yeah.
They're going to have very similar, if not better offers by the end of training camp than they will right now.
Yeah, so they're going to be looking for better opportunities to see the field when a couple of injuries pop up through camp. And we saw the Dolphins go with Culliver and Foster last year during camp. Was there anyone else? And Rambo as well was that after week 1. So they have taken players who they intended or started throughout the season, or intended to start in maybe Culliver's case, later in the season, or this going into the training camp season. So do you think they've kind of committed to Phillips being the nose tackle? I guess he's played a lot, so you would kind of expect them to maybe think he can take, like we know he can take on a workload in terms of the snap count, but do you think this is maybe too much pressure on him with no one back, like no true nose tackle backing him up, and he hasn't really proved he can do nose tackle like stuff? I mean, to me, it's like concerning in terms of just playing against the run. Is like Hayes enough to think you're going to go from one of the worst run defenses and move up anywhere?
My guess is almost that they're putting more stock in the linebacker improvement and getting Jones back to improving the run defense than really ask. Then I don't know. I mean, they've been saying positive things, but their message has been pretty consistent on Phillips, even from Joseph to Burke. They've been very consistent saying, hey, we like the good plays, but it's still just a matter of making those good plays or even average plays 80% of the time, as opposed to 40% of the time, 50% of the time, whatever it is. And so, this is the season usually where you would start to see that jump, that third, fourth season. That's going to be a little bit more when you're expecting that bigger jump from him. I just don't. I'm still with you a little bit that I just don't think that's his play style, to be like a one technique. So maybe I'd be worried that they're going to miscast him a little bit in that role. But theoretically, though, as far as his talent, this is where it should jump a little bit.
Should we move? Is there anyone else on the defensive line you'd be interested in? I guess Ego Ferguson's another guy in that same. He was in the same class as Will Sutton, wasn't he? And those two guys were kind of banded around in similar kind of range. That class, if memory serves me.
Yeah, I believe you're right. No, I think Sutton and Williams would be the two guys I would be interested in.
But yeah, I agree. Like, I still think like Sutton would be interesting, but I don't think he kind of solves the
Yeah,
answer of what you're doing with Phillips. But I think he would probably be the better of the two uh, tackles they brought in the draft, um, at least in terms of my pre-draft evaluation of those players. And he didn't really fit in what they were doing with the Bears' defensive front. They were asking him to two-gap quite a bit. I don't think that's particularly his game. Um, shall we move on? I know you wanted to touch on some corners. Is there any reason in particular you think they may look at corner other than obviously the slot position where there's not much competition with Bobby McCain?
yeah, I think the slot specifically is really what I'm looking at there, and there's definitely I think some good value and some good depth this year, which is uncommon. We saw Jason McCourty go to the Browns today, which I think was a nice pickup for them. He's probably not a guy that's going to play too much longer. He's going to be 30 years old this year. He would have been interesting on Miami, but Miami seems to be happy. They've got three outside corners with Lippett, and he did show improvement last year. So what I'm looking at specifically in the slot guy that they were linked to again a couple years ago, Alteron Werner, is
Yeah.
definitely a guy. I think he'd be a fantastic fit. Brandon Flowers, from the Chargers, if he's healthy. Uh, I'm a big fan of his. Now he's 31 and he's had concussion issues, so there's a lot going on there. Like you're probably picking up a guy uh, on his very last legs, just for that reason. But he's a guy that's very talented. Tremaine Brock is a good player, good starting outside corner, but he did also have an incident that led to his release right around the draft.
What do you think of Roberson? You liked him coming out of Florida, didn't you?
No,
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 you
I didn't
didn't.
like any.
Okay.
I didn't like any of the Florida corners. I
Okay.
actually like Jalen Watkins a lot more from that group, which is funny because Watkins is the only one left.
Okay.
I think, yeah. Brandon Boykin coming off a major injury, always going to be, I think, a little intriguing. I think his is really weird because like there was that hip thing that it was rumored to be, and then he goes down with a major lower body injury, and it might have been even a hip injury this past year, so he never even played for the Bears. But he might be an interesting guy that like you bring to camp just to see if he's got anything left because he was an extremely good slot corner there for a couple years, but he didn't really want to be stuck into the slot. I don't know, but that probably changes with the last couple years being pretty rough on him. So that's about it. I mean, Werner would be the guy that I would really be looking at um, just because of health reasons, but Flowers would be, I think, the highest upside pickup of them all. Um, with Brock being probably like the best actual outside corner. So and I would not expect them to prioritize the outside corner position. Like if it was me, I would be a little bit more aggressive. I would even kick the tires on like Sam Shields from Green Bay, another guy with some concussion issues, but that's like a really solid starter. Like if he and Brock were no issues, those are guys that are studs. So that just the issues is that injuries and obviously the off-field thing with Brock needs to be cleared up first.
Would you think they would look at safety at all? Obviously, they were linked to quite a few safeties pre-draft, and still a couple of big names available with Bird and Gilchrist, Aaron Williams. I think that's like kind of everyone. I guess Izza's still available. Dante Whitner, but that's not really the type of player they're going to be going after.
No.
I guess they were linked to Bird a couple of years ago, and that was were they linked to Bird? What am I thinking?
Yeah, they were, but I don't think they were ever in on him
Okay.
just because he was so expensive.
Yeah.
I
I always
actually
like
think
the idea of like an Aaron Williams style player next to Rashad Jones, but maybe with his like coming off an injury, I don't know if you want to invest too much in that.
it's funny because you could probably build a pretty solid starting lineup actually with the free agents, with like one player at every
Yeah,
position, and like but you'd be running like massive injury risk with like a lot of these guys. Like imagine a defensive secondary with Jarris Bird, Aaron Williams, Tremaine Brock, and Brandon Flowers, and Alteron Burner. Like that's actually like better than what probably like 10 teams are running with right now. But you have three or four of those guys that have a couple year history now of being major injuries. So yeah, I agree though. I think Williams is specifically the most intriguing. Bird would be great, but it's just he hasn't been the same guy than what we once knew. So unfortunately, that's really tough to try and project. It just there are some guys here though that kind of make you think, man, like that Nate Allen signing really early in free agency was just kind of weird. And I think that they had the chance to get the best one of them, Trey Boston.
yeah,
Boston becoming a free agent was a real strange decision. Carolina has now this history of kind of separating from defensive backs at strange times. Josh Norman, Ben Wickery, Trey Boston, and also um, Brandon Boykin. They cut him after like a week of having him. So like they've got this weird background of cutting these pretty good players when they're on the field. It's just obviously we don't know what's happening in the locker room, but I thought that was the guy. If Miami was going to pounce on anybody, that would be the guy.
I guess there's one little bit more of news that's come moving on from free agents, and that's Joe Schwone, is it pronounced, has moved on to the Bills as an assistant GM. Have you got any thoughts on that move at all?
I have none.
Okay.
No thoughts at all.
Yeah, neither have I. So the Dolphins could have blocked it 'cause I think it was kind of a parallelish move. Um, I think he was the director of player personnel, so it's slightly moving up, but they can block that kind of move, but they obviously haven't. So I guess moving inside division, that's kind of interesting. The AFC East is pretty ancestral in terms of player movement. You've kind of seen players like obviously like Kiko, Revis, quite a lot of guys. No, and mine blanked on. The Patriots always pick up everyone. Welker, I guess. But yeah, you kind of see guys move around, so that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I don't really know anything about him. But so that I think he's the only person to leave the Dolphins front office so far, and I believe they've had one internal promotion, and maybe a hiring. I can't recall. We may have talked about that before. But yeah, so we'll just bring it up that we may see another hiring to replace him. I think he came in at the same time, or at least he got promoted when Tenenbaum came in. So I think he was a scout before that. So I think it was an internal promotion. But we'll move on to the Patreon question, and it's about edge attire. So I guess in like Miami, we've seen slightly more limited variation in what the edge rushers wear compared to when OV was here, at least with like the half sleeves, which were really easy to identify. Now we've kind of just got like the wake high cut shoulder, and then like the Fide, Hayes and Branch sometimes have it as well, like the to the elbow undershirt. I think with Wake, he's just like trying to show off like as much skin as possible. And you see it like always like Thursday Night Football when he goes to like the after show thing and stuff, and he's just like in a little vest with his abs out. I think he's all just about. I mean, in theory, like if he had undershirt on, he would probably get even more held even more. So maybe that's also part of his reasoning. And then Harris has that thing with like all the Mizzou guys with the like rubber bands around the biceps to try and make them look bigger, which is kind of weird. So I don't know if that's even legal in the NFL. Probably not. You don't see many guys wear it, do you? But like always, the
No.
Mizzou edge rushers do.
Yeah, so it definitely is helpful to find indicators. It's really, really hard to see jersey numbers. So like,
Yeah,
especially when I'm looking at like corners, and like you could apply the same thing like defensive linemen or whatever really position you're looking at. Like,
especially broadcast.
yeah, for sure. Like it's a lot easier once well, and for
Only with
corners I think it's a little bit
trenches.
tougher. Yeah. So for trench play, obviously you get the different angle. Um, so trench play, I'm looking at like feet and like socks, especially like stances. Some
Okay, because
guys
I
will
always
wear.
look for hair. I look for hair first.
Yeah, if you can see, yeah, if you got a guy with like dreadlocks or something, it makes
That's
it
one of the
so
best with Dallas and Billy Turner. And cause with at least with offensive linemen, I'm looking at the beginning of the drive, and then I'm just like glancing, seeing if anything changes.
okay.
So
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm barely like looking for offensive line. Like so I'm never looking at all five guys. I'm just seeing if anything like stands out different. And what's kind of interesting about doing that as well is you'll see tendencies of like people changing their stance for particular plays, or if it's run pass, or some players just change their stance in different techniques, and that's not a good thing. But particularly with college prospects, it's quite like a good thing to like work out when they're like going through stuff. I find with wide receivers, their stance at line of scrimmage is like pretty uh, good way of discerning them. Like Kenny Stills, at least with the Saints, he was like super relaxed at line of scrimmage and would just have like his shoulders really loose. He's kind of changed that now with the Dolphins. He's a bit more stiffer at the line of scrimmage. So even just by identifying players by how they physically look before the snap of the ball can also like show you like a difference in maybe coaching style or how a player's developing. So that's particularly interesting with Kenny Stills. I watched a lot of Kenny Stills though before when he got traded for. So I all in one go and just like noticed that, and then that was like one thing that stuck with me, or a way to pick him out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that's a good one. I know for corners, um, they're really tough, I think, to pick out. Like if you
So Lippett and Maxwell kind of their sleeves are kind of unique in terms of ways to identify them. Like Maxwell has like the really baggy underarm, and then Lippett's is a bit shorter, aren't they?
yeah.
So that kind of helps.
Yeah, Bobby's got well, obviously he's always in the slot, but he's got the dreads.
Yeah.
So that makes it easier. Yeah, that's why I look at like the feet a lot though too, because especially once you get if you have like a group of teammates, like you mentioned Missouri and then Miami, if you get a group that are kind of doing similar things, sometimes you'll see like wrapped over tape, or like specific colors. So like sometimes someone will pick like a pink, especially in like October, or if they'll do like team colors or white. So like you'll get like the teal or you'll get the white, and then if someone else doesn't have it, you can just use that as an indicator all game. Um, Stance is a big one for sure. Although alignment more so at corner is going to be their off ball or on ball. So usually
Yeah.
like field versus boundary. Um, who's actually lining up in press or like showing press, and then who's off the ball. So that's usually going to be the easiest way. It's great though when someone has long hair or is willing to wear something a little bit different, like team color sleeves. Like that's always like the best, because they immediately will stick out. But if you get like the Oregon cornerbacks, they almost always look the exact same. They're all like the similar height too, so it's a real pain in the butt trying to watch them and identify them.
And I think like I'll even talk about players on a live game who I can recognize easier more than anyone else. Like I will pretty much mention Fide like once a drive, like one time every drive he's in, just because I first look at after looking at what the coverage Dolphins are showing, then I look at the defensive line. So he'll be probably, and I do from top to bottom, and then so if there on the right hand side, he's generally going to be the first defensive lineman as well. You see, so I'll probably subconsciously be thinking about him more than most players because one, he's really easy to identify, and he's going to be probably the second thing I'm looking at after what coverage they're in. Is it what's like the first thing you look at on the field when you're let's say like live broadcast, because when you're going back over film and all 22, you're going for there for more specific reasons generally. But when you're watching a live game and kind of looking at the broader game and not one position in particular, is there anything you're looking at first pre-snap?
Usually I'll kind of look at like size. So like, is there anybody that really stands out as far as size? Those guys, like I think generally guys tend to stick out a little bit. Like Jadeveon Clowney kind of comes to mind here. So like when I was just watching South Carolina, like he was always like the biggest, thickest dude on the field. And so like immediately I was like, wow, okay, like that guy's like rocked up. And Sean Oakman always had this big like he always won this battle. It's because he was so massive and just chiseled that like your eyes would immediately go to him. Now, obviously, once the ball is snapped, they got to back it up, and that's where like if I'm not specifically looking at a guy, I'll just look for like the fastest get off, the defensive front seven. So like this, and then this is where like Kiko Alonso kind of stood out at Oregon. Is like you'd watch them and you'd see how much ground he would cover, very quickly. Like just like the first player or two to move. So like the first player to move forward, that's generally going to be one of their better players. Just the speed off the line, even if they're snap jumping, like you still kind of like that's what your eyes should kind of go towards. If it's a linebacker and they're going backwards, you kind of want to see like how quickly they're gaining depth, and that also shows one, play recognition, and it also can show quickness and ability to get to their spot. So like just it can show athletic ability, it can also show understanding of what they're seeing, and both of those are very very critical as far as NFL success.
Do you watch pro games any different to college games live? Is there anything differently you're watching when you're watching NFL games, or do you try and have a similar process so you're kind of evaluating players in the same way?
NFL, I think, is a little bit more focused just because I'm more familiar with the players. There's such
There's
a
less
wide
learning.
net. Yeah. There's such a wide net of talent in college, and there's so many teams and games that it's just it's impossible to know everyone. So, and you don't need to know everyone. You need to know generally a small handful per team. So you can kind of focus on them just based off of like pre-game work, like based off of size and like production. Like you can kind of whittle it down to a couple guys worth watching. Whereas NFL, I just think NFL, generally speaking, I like to do position by position, especially now live game. If I'm watching just for evaluation purposes, I'm going to usually focus in on like the trenches, and I'm just going to watch that group as much as I can. And you're going to miss some of it. Like it's not possible to get it all the first time. But if you're looking at like one side of the line, it makes it a whole lot easier. So you're watching like those two players and just seeing like how they're performing. And your eyes are eventually going to get drawn to the other players too if they're playing well enough or poorly enough. And it's just that obvious. So it's harder to say. Like if I'm watching like corners, I'm going to take a look at their pre-snap alignment, and that kind of should give you a little bit of a hint as far as like what to expect. So even if you're watching the opposite corner, if you know, hey, this corner was playing off the ball, then you can usually guess, okay, if the quarterback's going to throw it quickly, he's going to hit that underneath route and take whatever that corner just gave him. So it's just a little bit of pre-draft work and kind of prioritizing what you're looking at, so you're not just looking at everything. It's really hard to look at everything, if not impossible.
Are you the same as me, where you like watch the play like 4 or 5 times, and that's
Yeah.
kind of
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. Like that's like when I was charting cornerbacks over summer.
that's why Game Pass is awful, because the
Yeah,
rewinding is so trash.
yeah, it's really bad. And it's just time
Torrent
consuming.
your games, torrent your games.
Yeah, that would be a lot easier. Yeah, it's hard. It's just super time consuming. Like when I would do every Wednesday, like the Dolphin breakdowns, it would take me 3 or 4 hours to go through the game,
Yeah.
and post everything on Twitter. I mean, even if I wasn't posting it on Twitter, like that didn't take long. It's just the constant watching, rewatching, of the snaps, and
And
so
then when you
it's
go to get a drink and then it disconnects for some reason and you've lost
oh
your position,
yeah,
that's
if you
fast.
pause it on like the all-22, it's gonna time out pretty
Yeah.
quickly. So you have to. The trick is to switch over to
Oh, to
the
broadcast and
broadcast,
go back.
yeah, and then go back over to the all-22, and it'll work. So
I never think I'm going to be that long. But it
yeah,
catches you out.
yeah, it's rough. I mean, it's as rough as it could be for people watching football, but like it's super time consuming and really frustrating when you're trying to like power through some games.
Is there anything you look at in particular pre-snap in terms of like formations, offensive? Like, are you counting how many, what personnel offense are in, or um, whether the defense is nickel? Which I mean, most of the time, I just assume teams are a nickel unless it's versus 12 personnel. So I'll generally just look for how many tight ends are on the line.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the easiest way to look at it because, or if they have like bunch, like so trips wide
Yeah,
receivers, just look at like the majority of the formation. So like if it's two backs,
looks like we've lost Ian there. Um, but yeah, I think that's everything uh, about like formations. It's kind of interesting. Ian was talking about, we'll just see if he comes back. Ian was talking about like when he's watching college games, like who's big. So that's kind of almost what I do with offensives. Offenses is just like, how many big skill position players are there, and then that's kind of my indicator on whether they're in 12 or not. And you can kind of reaffirm that later in the second or third thing. But generally with offense, I'm like trying to get a quick read on what personnel they're in, and sometimes you can do that when they have like the huddle camera as well. Um, so I'll just try and pick out how many tight ends, or if there's an extra offensive lineman coming in. You can see that with the subs as well, going into the huddle if they are huddling up, and then just like whether they're in shotgun, pistol, under center. That's all pretty easy. So that's I like pre-snap. I'm generally watching the defense more than the offense, and then it's all trenches for like the first 3 or 4 snaps. That sounds like looks like Ian's back with us.
yeah,
So are you kind of the same where obviously the first 3 snaps like the trench play, that's like when it's most pertinent, and also you can't really see much in terms of what wide receivers are doing with broadcast. Um, so is that just when the all 22 is like so important, and it's a shame they just don't broadcast all 22 like they do with the
yeah,
national championship game, which is like the best
yeah,
TV.
for sure. And that's that's why I bless the Pac-12 actually because Pac-12 does it as close as they can, really with like their broadcast view for the most part. They usually have like a pretty wide angle for their broadcast, so like you can see generally a lot more. Um, compared to like the Big Ten and most like the Eastern conferences are like so close on the quarterback, like you can't see anything else. Like it's within that first 5 yards, so it's just like, come on. But yeah, West Coast, where it's a little bit more aired out, it's so much nicer.
Yeah, I agree. I really like Pac-12's coverage, and they even put it on YouTube for international. You have to pay a bit, but it's a pretty nice way to watch it
Nice.
when you can't get all 22. Is there anything else you want to talk about on like just the bait? Because I guess you probably get this question a lot, like talking about scouting and how to get into it. And it's like whenever the first time I was like taught to watch film was like how to identify players as like the key thing. Particularly as like I was being taught how to scout opposition, and then you kind of need to know the formations, who's coming on for what sub packages. So I think always player identification is like the crucial thing, and being able to do that quickly. Is there anything else you're looking at other than like the stances, hair, towels? I guess towels and like stuff around the waist are kind of useful. I can't really think of anything else. Like I find it really hard when it's the the breast cancer awareness month, because just everyone's got pink accessories, so suddenly you're just losing like one of the differentiators. So is there anything you do differently for like that month when everything's pink?
Yeah, that can be really hard on the eyes. Um, you almost want like someone to just completely overdo it. Excuse me, and just have like the towel and the socks and the gloves and the arm sleeves and like just look like ridiculous in it, because like that's the easiest way to look for it. Now if they're all doing it, like some of like the Pittsburgh guys, they'll do it. Um, but I think, who was it? I think it might have been William Gay. Maybe it was William Gay. Um, he would wear just like the forearm sleeves and then
Yeah.
like the shoes. And so for him, that was really easy for me to pick out. Um, so like it can be a really good thing, although after watching like an hour of it, you just hate yourself because it just kills your eyes like that. I really hate the cancer awareness, the overkill of the attire. I love the cause. It's just really hard to watch.
Oh, we don't need to get into the amount the NFL actually gives to the charity as well. Uh, Should we leave it there then? I think we've talked enough about. Uh,
I think so.
the-
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, for me, for like a scouting perspective, like I do a lot of my work pre-game. Like I know going in who physically is going to fit the bill, because we have to be realists. Like 5'6" dudes aren't are like 99% chance aren't going to have even get on an NFL radar. Um, Tarek Cohen, the what is it, like North Carolina A&T back that was drafted in the 4th round by the Bears. Like, it's such an anomaly just to even get a chance that like we can rule out a lot of guys just by their measurables, and the listed weights and heights are off anyways. But like I do a lot of that, so like who is production wise there and who size wise fits the bill will already whittle down who you need to watch like by 90%. And then who's also eligible. Only I generally only look at seniors unless if it's like a big name underclassman or if it's someone that's getting a lot of buzz. So I'm specifically watching them. Because other than that, I mean, it's just too many players to watch if you don't know anything about them. And then I just like to focus on those couple players throughout the game, and if they're not making many plays throughout like a quarter or two, I'll just stop watching them unless if, and not to say that like I'll write them off completely, but like I'm going to focus on other things. And if they happen to make some plays, then I'll just come back to them.
See, I take really fleeting notes or with college games anyway. I take really fleeting notes on everyone pretty much,
Yeah.
at least for when they're freshmen. And then if I'm getting enough notes on one person, then I'll have their number down for that team, and I'll make sure I check on that player each game if they like have 3 or 4 times they pop early in the season. And then that way I've kind of got like an interesting bank now where I can go back 4 or 5 years and find a player in like their first game or something, and it's like see if they did anything or not. So that's kind of interesting, but I think everyone finds like their own way of doing it, and I kind of need to be more organized with my note taking, just because like I naturally just try and retain information in my head rather than be organized with it. So I've tried to like force myself to be overly organized, but then instead I just have scrap bits of paper in folders that have a team's name on it, with like 70, and got washed out a bunch, and I just have stuff like that. But at least then I've got like something so I can remember like, 4 years ago I thought number 70 kept getting washed out. So it helps slightly make me remember things. But I think we'll leave that now, as the Kings won / lost the lottery-ish a bit, but it wasn't too bad. And so make sure you follow the show at MiamiPod, themiamipod.com, and Ian, you can follow him at NFL Film Study. and draftcentric.weebly.com and Bleach Report. He's going to be taking a couple of months off from the podcast. He'll be back in August. So we'll be doing, and he'll be having a well-earned break, as if you bought his draft guide or been reading all his Bleacher Report coverage, you would have known he does way too much in not much time. So in that period of time, we'll be having some guests on, and I'll do the odd solo show when there's some more meaty news comes up. But until then, thanks for listening, and goodbye.